Why would a father stand in a courtroom and tell his grown son that he was never part of the family? What makes a man smile after hearing something like that? And what exactly was inside the envelope that made his father's wife turn white as a sheet? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Michael Hale, I am 42 years old, and my father is Judge Robert Hale. People in my city talk about him with respect. They call him a man of honor, a protector of justice, a strong voice in the courtroom. When they learn that I am his son, their eyes usually light up. They say that I must be proud, that I must feel lucky. I normally just smile and change the subject. It is hard to explain to strangers that the man they admire in public barely recognizes me in private. I grew up in my mother's small apartment, not in my father's large house. My mother is a nurse. She worked nights and weekends so I could have school supplies and clean clothes. My father sent money sometimes, but he sent his attention somewhere else. After he married Evelyn and had my half-brother Andrew, it became clear where I stood. I was the side note, the mistake people did not mention at dinner. On the evening this all really started, I was driving to my father's house for a family dinner. That was how Evelyn described it in the group message. She said that they wanted to talk about the future, that it was important for everyone to be present. Her tone, even in text, was polite but cold. Andrew reacted with a joking message about hoping there would be enough chairs for all the real Hales. I knew it was a dig. I still replied that I would be there on time. My father's house sat on a hill, big and perfect, like a picture from a magazine. When I walked in, the air smelled like expensive cleaning products and roasted meat. I saw portraits on the walls, my father in his judge's robe, Evelyn at some charity event, Andrew receiving an award at law school. There was no photo of me anywhere. I had checked before. That evening I checked again. Nothing had changed. The dining room was already full when I arrived. Long table, white tablecloth, glasses lined up like soldiers. My father sat at the head, of course. Evelyn sat to his right, Andrew to his left. The other chairs were filled with a few of their friends and a couple of my father's colleagues from court. A chair stood at the very end of the table, a little away from the main group. Evelyn told me with a smile that my seat was there. She did not say it in a rude voice, but her meaning was clear. Important people near the center, extra people at the edge. During dinner, my father talked almost the whole time. He told stories about big cases and complicated legal problems. People laughed at his jokes and praised his mind. When he introduced Andrew to one of the guests, he said that Andrew was the future of the Hale name. He did not mention me at all. One guest noticed I was quiet and asked who I was. My father paused for a second too long. Then he said that I was a distant relative. Evelyn quickly changed the subject to the dessert. I told myself that none of this was new. My father had been like this for years. He had introduced Andrew to judges, lawyers, and donors since he was a teenager. He only called me if he needed something simple, like computer help or a ride when his car was in the shop. Still, sitting there at the end of that long table, listening to people talk about the Hale legacy while they looked past me, something inside my chest felt heavy and very still. After dessert, Evelyn announced that the charity gala later that week would be very special for the family. She said that the board wanted to honor my father and Andrew for their work in supporting justice. She said my presence was welcome, but then added, in a softer tone, that I should dress properly so I would not stand out in the wrong way. It was her usual method, a small cut, covered with sugar. On the drive back to my apartment that night, I thought about calling my mother and telling her every detail. I almost did, but I knew she would just say that she was sorry and that my father had always been like this. She would remind me that we had built our own life without him. I loved her for that, but part of me still wanted something else from him, something like a real place in that big house on the hill. It was stupid, but it was real. At my own small kitchen table, I opened my laptop and checked my work email. I am a systems analyst. My world is quiet and logical, full of code and diagrams. People at my office respect me because I fix their problems. They do not care about my last name. One of my colleagues had sent a reminder about a project deadline. I replied, then sat back and stared at the wall for a long time. On the shelf across the room, a thin black folder sat between manuals. I had put it there months before, after I'd helped my mother sort some old papers. I did not touch it that night. I only looked at it and then turned off the light. The charity gala took place in a downtown hotel with glass walls and chandeliers. When I walked in, people were already holding drinks and talking in low, excited voices. The event was raising money for some legal foundation my father supported. There were judges, lawyers, local politicians, and wealthy donors. I saw my father near the stage, shaking hands and smiling like a friendly king. Evelyn moved around the room in a silver dress, greeting people by name. Andrew stood with a group of younger guests, laughing loudly. When Evelyn saw me, she gave me a brief look up and down. She told me that it was good I had decided to come after all, and then she turned to a nearby couple. She introduced Andrew as their brilliant son and called me a friend of the family who worked in computers. The couple nodded politely. I felt my jaw tense. Friend of the family. Not son, not even Michael Hale. Just a man from nowhere. I found a place near the back of the hall, close to the wall, where I could watch without being watched too much. The servers moved through the crowd with trays of drinks. Soft music played. At one point, Andrew walked past me with a group. I heard him tell someone that his father had sacrificed so much for him and Evelyn, and that they were the real core of the family. He did not lower his voice when he said it. He knew I was within earshot. I thought about leaving. My car keys were heavy in my pocket. I imagined stepping out into the cool night air and driving home to silence. But I stayed. I do not fully know why. Maybe it was simple habit. Maybe I wanted to see how far they would push me. Maybe it was something even deeper, something like quiet curiosity about just how small they thought I was. After a while, the music stopped and lights dimmed a little. A man from the foundation walked onto the stage and started talking into the microphone. He spoke about justice, community, and the importance of strong legal institutions. He thanked donors. Then he turned to my father and said that tonight, the foundation was proud to honor Judge Robert Hale and his son Andrew Hale for their contributions. The crowd applauded. My father stepped up to the microphone. He seemed taller under the lights, full of confidence. Evelyn stood near the stage, smiling with practiced pride. Andrew waited beside her, ready for his moment. My father talked about his career, his work, and his values. Then he started talking about family. He said that a man's true legacy was not his own name, but the children who carried it. He said that his son Andrew made him proud every day, and that Andrew was the future of the Hale name. He spoke about Evelyn as his rock, his true partner. He said nothing about me. A few people near my corner of the room turned and looked at me, maybe because they knew, maybe because they had heard rumors. I kept my face calm. Inside, the heavy stillness in my chest changed slightly. It did not become fire. It became something colder, more focused. After the speech, people crowded around my father and Andrew to congratulate them. I stayed back. I saw one of my father's colleagues, a man I remembered from years ago, approach Evelyn. He nodded toward me and asked a quiet question. Evelyn looked in my direction with a small, tight smile. She said something in a low voice, and they both laughed politely. Then she turned her head fully toward me. For a second, our eyes met. In that moment, I saw something I had not noticed before. It was not just dislike, it was calculation. I realized that people like Evelyn did not simply forget sons like me. They placed us carefully out of the frame. They did it on purpose. Someone near them lifted a phone to take a picture of my father and Andrew. As the flash went off, I noticed the camera angle. It captured my father, Evelyn at his side, Andrew beside him, and me blurred in the background at the edge of the crowd, almost cut off by the frame. Evelyn leaned in to say something into my father's ear, still looking straight at me. Another guest, a woman with a press badge, raised her camera as well. The lens pointed toward the stage, but I could feel it swing slightly in my direction, like she wanted to capture the whole scene, not just the smiling faces in the center. The camera shutter clicked, bright and sharp in the soft music. I did not sleep much after the gala. When I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that stage, the lights, my father's hand on Andrew's shoulder. I saw the way people looked at me like I was a stranger who had walked into the wrong party. By morning, my chest felt tight, but my mind was strangely clear. It was not a new pain. It was an old one waking up. On my way to work, I stopped at a small bakery near my apartment. I bought coffee and a plain roll and sat by the window. Outside, people walked fast, carrying bags, talking on phones. Inside, there was soft music and the smell of sugar. For a few minutes, I watched people and tried to put the previous evening into a box in my mind. I told myself that this was just how things were with my father, that I should be used to it. But another part of me refused to accept that this was normal. When I was a child, I did not understand why my father only appeared on certain weekends. I just knew that my mother's face grew tense when his name was mentioned. She would tell me that my father was busy and that important people had important work. I believed her. Children find ways to make sense of things that hurt. One memory always comes back to me. I was 9. It was a Sunday afternoon, and my father had promised to take me to a baseball game. I waited by the window of our small living room, holding a glove he had bought me. The glove was too big for my hand, but I liked the way it smelled and the way it made me feel connected to him. The time passed. My mother moved quietly around the kitchen. She did not say anything about the clock, but I saw her glance at it more than once. When the game had already started on TV, the phone rang. My mother answered, and I watched her shoulders fall. She told me that my father's work had come up, that he could not make it, that he was sorry. She said it gently, but I heard the flatness in her voice. That was the first day I understood that promises could be flexible when it came to me. A few years later, my father had already married Evelyn. I met her for the first time at their new house. I was 13, awkward, and quiet. Evelyn was beautiful and sharp. She looked at me like I was a surprise she did not order. My father showed me the house, the big rooms, the new baby furniture. Andrew was just a small bundle then. My father said that he was the future of the family. He did not say who I was. On that visit, they took a family picture in front of the house. Evelyn stood close to my father, holding baby Andrew. She asked the photographer to take a few test shots first. In those early shots, I stood beside them. Then she whispered something to my father and the photographer. She smiled at me and said that they wanted one picture of the new family and that we could take another with me later. The other picture never happened. Years later, I saw that photo in a magazine article about my father, with a title calling them the Hale family. I was nowhere in it. My mother never spoke badly about my father when I was young. She said that adults had their reasons and that I did not need to carry their anger. She just kept working long shifts, kept helping me with homework in the evenings, kept cheering at my small achievements. When I got my first job in tech, she cried and said she was proud. When I bought my own car, she hugged me and said I had built my life with my own hands. It took me a long time to understand that in my father's world, I was a quiet inconvenience. He would call sometimes when he needed help with something related to his computer or his phone. He would ask me to come by and fix it, then introduce me to his friends as someone who worked in IT. He did not use the word son. He always sounded like he was doing me a favor by letting me stand in his living room. At work, my life was different. My boss knew my skills and trusted my judgment. When something broke in the system, people came to me without questions. I did not need a famous last name there. I just needed to be thorough and steady. In the office, I was not a shadow. I was a person with a clear role. Still, when my coworkers learned who my father was, their reactions made something twist inside me. One of them once said that it must be amazing to have such a powerful father, that my future must be safe. I smiled and said that I stood on my own feet. I did not explain that the man they imagined probably would not notice if I disappeared. After the gala, I called my mother in the late afternoon. I told her that the event had gone as expected. She did not push for details right away. She just listened to my voice. Then she asked me to come over for dinner the next day. I agreed. My mother's apartment had not changed much in years. The furniture was simple and clean. Old family photos covered one wall. There were pictures of me at different ages, missing teeth, bad haircuts, graduation cap. None of them included my father. My mother made a stew and sliced bread while I sat at the small table. She watched me with careful eyes. She asked me about the gala. I told her about the stage, the speech, the way my father and Andrew were praised. I told her about how I was introduced as a friend of the family. I tried to keep my voice calm, but my hands tightened around my glass. My mother said that she was sorry. Then she said that she was not surprised. She reminded me gently that my father had always cared more about his image than about our day-to-day life. I nodded. Then she said something she had not said before. She told me that when I was a baby, my father had promised to be part of our lives. He had signed certain things. He had made official commitments. Over time, he had tried to act like those commitments were less real. But on paper, she said, the truth was clear. She told me that after the divorce, there were documents she had kept, just in case. She did not go into detail. She only said that more had been promised to me than my father wanted to admit in public. I asked her why she had never told me this before. She said that she did not want me to grow up counting on money or on a man who had already let us down over and over. She told me that she had hoped my father would change on his own without needing legal reminders. Then she looked at me with tired eyes and said that maybe she had given him too much time. We did not talk long about it. My mother does not like conflict, but her words stayed with me. There were documents, there were promises. There was a version of the story that lived in ink and signatures, not in speeches at fancy events. On my way home from her place, I thought about that thin black folder on my shelf. Months ago, when my mother had cleaned out an old box, she had handed it to me and said that it might matter someday. I had put it away and not opened it. At the time, I did not want to stir up old wounds. Now, after the gala and my mother's hint, the memory of that folder felt heavier. That night, back at my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table again. I took the folder down and placed it in front of me. My hand rested on the cover, but I did not open it. I told myself that this was not the right moment. I feared what I might find. I feared that I would see proof that my father had promised something and then ignored it. I feared that seeing it on paper would make the distance between us impossible to pretend away. Instead, I stood up and made tea. I tried to distract myself by answering emails and looking at project notes, but my eyes kept drifting back to the folder. It was like a small, silent object pulling on my attention. The next morning at work, my mind still felt divided. Part of me was counting server logs and checking systems. Another part was replaying my mother's words. My colleague Darren noticed that I was quieter than usual. He asked if everything was okay at home. I told him that my family was complicated. He laughed and said that everyone's family was complicated. Then he said that at least with a judge for a father, I probably never had to worry about legal problems. I just nodded and went back to my screen. During lunch, I stepped outside with my phone. I scrolled through old messages from my father. They were short, usually about practical things. A few were about the charity events he wanted me to attend for support. None of them asked how I was. None of them mentioned pride. Near the end of the workday, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Andrew. He rarely contacted me directly unless he needed something. This time, his tone was different. He wrote that there would be a very important family meeting soon, that Father wanted everyone there to settle some issues about the future. He added a little line saying that this was mostly for the real core of the family, but that I should probably come so there would be no confusion later. I stared at the words on the screen for a long time. A second later, another notification appeared. The family group chat lit up with a new message from Evelyn. She said that the meeting would be at the courthouse, not the house. She asked everyone to dress appropriately. She wrote that this was about putting things in order once and for all. I watched the 3 little dots blink as more messages were being typed. The meeting at the country club came 2 weeks after the gala. Evelyn said in the group chat that it was just a casual family lunch with a few important friends. She added that it would be nice if I could make the effort to attend. I knew what that meant. When she said nice, she meant expected. The club sat behind a line of tall trees with a long driveway and a white stone fountain in the front. People in clean golf clothes walked around like they had nowhere urgent to be. Inside, the air smelled like polished wood and money. A host in a suit led me to the lounge. My father, Evelyn, and Andrew sat at a table near a wide window that looked out over the golf course. 2 other men were there, lawyers I recognized from my father's past cases. They all had drinks in front of them. I noticed that there was no chair waiting for me, just a space at the corner. The host quickly brought another chair when he saw me standing. Evelyn greeted me with a smooth voice. She said that they had already ordered and that she hoped I did not mind. My father nodded in my direction without standing up. Andrew leaned back in his seat with that relaxed posture he used when he felt completely safe. The talk at first was about my father's work and Andrew's new opportunities. One of the lawyers said that Andrew was following in his father's footsteps and that it was good for the Hale line. My father smiled in that proud way he never used with me. Evelyn mentioned some charity events and how the press loved seeing the judge and his real family together. The word real hung in the air longer than it should have. I tried to keep my face neutral. I answered questions about my job when someone asked. I said that my work was going fine. One of the lawyers said that it must be useful to have a son in technology, since the world was becoming more digital. My father gave a small laugh and said that I did something with computers, but that I preferred to stay in the background. He said it like it was a joke. Then the talk shifted to family matters. Evelyn cleared her throat and said that they were going to start organizing things for the future. She told the lawyers that it was important to make sure the family's name and property stayed where it truly belonged. Andrew added that some things needed to be clarified so there would not be trouble later. I listened carefully. They did not use my name. They used phrases like core family and main heirs. Each time, their eyes seemed to pass straight through me. Finally, one of the lawyers turned toward me and asked a polite question. He wondered if I had any expectations regarding Hale assets. I said that I had built my own life and that I did not count on anything from my father. That was true. I had never made plans around his money. At the same time, hearing my own voice say it out loud made something settle inside me. It felt like closing a door I had left open too long. Andrew laughed softly. He told the table that it was good I understood my position, that it saved them all from awkward conversations. He said that family inheritance should go to those who carried the name properly. When he said that, a few nearby guests turned their heads. I held his gaze. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I simply looked at him until he grew uncomfortable and glanced away. His cheeks reddened. He seemed annoyed that I did not react the way he wanted. A little later, when the lawyers stepped away to take calls, Andrew moved closer. He lowered his voice, but not enough to keep nearby people from hearing. He said that I should not get my hopes up about belonging in the Hale circle. He said that some branches on the family tree were just mistakes and that it was kinder to cut them off. He said it like a joke. He waited for someone to laugh. One of the club members at a nearby table did laugh, quickly, and then looked guilty. Evelyn gave Andrew a small warning look, but my father said nothing. He did not correct him. He did not tell him to be respectful. He just sipped his drink and stared out at the golf course. That was the moment something changed inside me. It was not rage. There was no sudden wish to shout or break things. Instead, there was a click, like a lock turning. For years, I had accepted my place in this family as something fixed, like weather. Standing in that club, with my father's silence and Andrew's words ringing in my ears, I realized it was not weather. It was a system. Systems can be understood. Systems can be changed. I finished my drink and said that I had to go back to work. Evelyn made a few polite sounds. My father did not try to stop me. As I walked through the lobby, I saw the club manager shake my father's hand near the bar. My father was smiling again. To the outside world, everything looked perfect. 2 days later, my mother called and asked if I could meet her at the hospital. She had been feeling tired and her doctor wanted to run some tests. When I arrived, she was sitting in the lobby with a blanket over her knees. She smiled when she saw me, though there was a tightness around her eyes. We talked about normal things at first. She said the nurses were kind. She asked about my work, my apartment, whether I was eating real food or just takeout. Eventually, she asked how things were with my father's side. I told her about the country club. I told her how Andrew had spoken and how my father had stayed silent. My mother's face grew still. She looked down at her hands. After a moment, she said that she had always known this was who he was, but that hearing it still hurt. Then she did something she rarely did. She brought up the past in a very direct way. She reminded me of the early years after the divorce, when my father had fought to control not just money, but the story of who I was. She said that there had been hearings, agreements, and written terms. She said that at the time, his pride had forced him to sign things he might now wish to forget. She told me again that she had documents about those years. She said that they sat in a secure place, not just in the thin black folder I had at home. She said that some of those papers did not only cover child support. Some of them spoke about my status as his son, about legal recognition, about promises regarding the future. I asked why he would agree to such things if he planned to treat me like this. She said that, back then, he cared about avoiding scandal. He did not want his colleagues to see him as a man who denied his own child. It was easier for him to sign papers in private than to face public judgment. Over time, as his career grew and my presence was kept quiet, he probably counted on everyone forgetting those documents existed. My mother placed her hand over mine. She told me that she had never wanted to use those papers as weapons. She had hoped he would grow into them, that he would live up to what he had signed. Then she looked at me with a serious expression and said that maybe it was time for me to know exactly what was written there. We did not go into details. She said she would make sure I could see everything soon. She told me to be patient and smart, not emotional. She said that men like my father respected rules on paper more than feelings in a room. On my way out of the hospital, I passed a bulletin board covered with flyers. One of them was about legal aid and estate planning. Another was about support groups for families. For some reason, those sheets of paper stood out to me more than the bright posters for events. Rules and agreements, legacies, quiet structures hidden under daily life. That night, when I got home, I did not turn on the TV. I went straight to my small home office. It was really just a corner of my living room with a desk and shelves, but it was where my mind felt most clear. I sat down at my computer and opened a blank folder on my private drive. I named it Hale 1994 Present. I began to add what I already had. I copied old emails from my father, including the ones where he referred to me as his son when it was convenient for him, such as notes to schools and insurance forms. I saved screenshots of the group chat messages where Evelyn talked about our family and purposely left out my name, and where Andrew spoke about the real Hales before meetings with lawyers. I also added a document where I wrote down everything my mother had told me so far, with dates and rough timelines. I noted the year of the divorce, the first hearing, the times she mentioned agreements about support and recognition. I did not have the official documents yet, but I could build a timeline around them. As I worked, I realized something about myself. I had never been the kind of man who enjoyed conflict. I avoided shouting matches. I stayed late at work to fix problems before anyone noticed them. But I knew systems. I knew how to find weak points and pressure points in complex structures. I realized that my family, in a way, was just another system with people, rules, and hidden parts. I did not know yet what I would do with any of this. I only knew that I was done standing in the background with empty hands. If my father and his chosen circle saw me as a branch they could cut off whenever they pleased, then I needed to understand exactly how deep my roots went. I worked late into the night, organizing digital files and notes. When I finally pushed my chair back, my eyes were tired, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. I switched off the desk lamp and stepped into the dark hallway toward my bedroom. Just as I did, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen showed a missed call from an unknown number and a new voicemail notification. The only text preview I could see was the name of the sender, Carla Mendez, attorney at law. The next morning, I listened to the voicemail while my coffee machine hummed in the background. A calm female voice introduced herself as Carla Mendez, attorney at law. She said that my mother had mentioned some old family legal matters and had given her permission to contact me. She added that if I had questions about past agreements, she would be glad to talk. I stood in my small kitchen with the mug in my hand and stared at the wall. I remembered my mother's face in the hospital lobby and the way she had spoken about documents and promises. Hearing Carla's message made it feel less like vague history and more like a file someone could open. On my way to work, I called Carla back. She sounded professional, but there was a warmth under her words. She said that she had known my mother for years, that she had helped her with some paperwork after the divorce. She told me that there were indeed records related to me, and that if I wanted to understand them, I should come by her office. Her office was in an old brick building downtown, above a pharmacy. The waiting room was quiet, with simple chairs and a shelf full of law books and magazines. A framed certificate on the wall showed her law school and the year she graduated. There was a plant in the corner that looked more alive than most of the ones in my office. Carla was in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back and clear, tired eyes. She shook my hand and told me to sit. She started by asking how I was doing, not in a polite small-talk way, but like she actually wanted an honest answer. I told her that things were complicated with my father's side of the family. She said she knew enough to understand. She explained that years ago, when my parents divorced, there had been several hearings. My father had wanted to control the narrative and avoid scandal, so he had agreed to certain terms. She said that some of those terms involved me directly, not just as a child who needed support back then, but as a recognized heir and legal son. She did not slide any papers across the desk. She did not show me signatures yet. She just described the framework. I listened carefully. My chest felt tight, but my mind was calm. Hearing her speak confirmed what my mother had only hinted at. On paper, I was not an accident at the edge of the family. I was clearly identified, with rights and recognition. The distance came from behavior, not from law. Carla asked me about the present. She wanted to know about the way my father introduced me, the family gatherings, the comments at the country club, the plans for this future meeting Evelyn had mentioned. I told her about the gala, about the speech where my father called Andrew his legacy. I told her about being introduced as a distant relative and a friend of the family who worked with computers. She nodded and made a few notes. She said that men like my father often depended on people forgetting the boring details written years ago. She said that when someone tried to erase a person in public while still bound by certain private agreements, that could become important. We spoke about options in general terms. She did not push me toward any particular action. She said that the first step was to gather all the relevant information and to keep emotions from guiding decisions. She reminded me that legal systems move slowly but steadily, and that timing matters. Before I left, she told me that she would prepare a complete set of copies from the old files my mother had given permission to share. She said that we would go through them together later, line by line, if I chose to. For now, she advised me to pay attention to what my father and his circle did next, not just what they said. When I stepped back onto the street, the air felt colder. The city noise seemed louder, but my thoughts were more organized. For the first time, I was not just a person being pushed around by my father's choices. I was a party with information, quietly standing on ground he had created himself many years ago. In the days that followed, life on the surface went on as usual. I went to work, fixed bugs, attended meetings. My coworkers joked about weekend plans and complained about software updates. Underneath all that, a second track in my mind stayed focused on my father. I began to collect small things. I saved copies of invitations and messages. I kept the screenshots of the family chat where Evelyn spoke about the real family and the core heirs. I wrote down dates when my father had used my full name on official email headers and school forms in the past. I gathered records of events where he had introduced Andrew as his only son in front of people who knew I existed. I also started to think about the financial side, not because I suddenly cared about his money for itself, but because people like my father show their true priorities and where they direct resources. One afternoon, I took a longer lunch break and went to my bank. The bank manager knew me by name. I had been a client there for years. She asked how my mother was doing, and then, in a quiet office, I asked her a general question. I wanted to understand how inherited funds, trusts, and old agreements usually worked, especially when there had been a divorce and remarriage. I did not mention my father's name at first. I kept it hypothetical. She explained the basics. She talked about how court orders can shape future distributions, how trusts can carry conditions, how some things cannot simply be changed by will later without triggering certain processes. As she spoke, I started linking my memories of my parents' divorce to her description. The shape of what Carla and my mother had hinted at became clearer. At the end of the conversation, I mentioned my father's name in a neutral way. The manager looked thoughtful and said that if there were any accounts or instruments tied to those old court orders, they would be handled carefully. She said she could not discuss specific accounts without proper authority, but she encouraged me to stay in touch with my attorney. The way she said it told me she understood more than she was allowed to say. When I walked out of the bank, I saw Evelyn's car passing slowly on the street. She was in the passenger seat, talking to someone and looking at her phone. For a brief second, her eyes flicked toward the bank entrance. Our gazes met. Her expression did not change, but there was a tightness in her jaw. She knew I had been somewhere she did not expect me to be. That evening, a new message appeared in the family group chat. Evelyn wrote that the date for the important meeting had been confirmed. She said it would not be at the house after all, but at the courthouse where my father worked. She called it a formal step toward putting the Hale affairs in order. She reminded everyone to arrive on time, dressed appropriately because reputation matters. Andrew added a short message underneath. He said that this was about making sure the future was clean and clear, and that some old confusion would finally be removed. He included a little laughing symbol at the end, as if it were a joke only a few of them understood. I did not respond right away. Instead, I opened my Hale 1994 present folder and added a note with the meeting date and time. I wrote down the exact phrasing they had used in the chat. I had learned from my work that precise wording can become important later. The next week, Carla called me back and said that she had gathered copies of everything related to my parents' case and the agreements involving me. She invited me to come in at a time that worked for me. I chose a late afternoon after work. This time, when I sat in her office, there was a neat stack of folders on the desk. She rested her hands on them and told me that these represented years of choices. She said that what mattered now was not just what was written on the pages, but how those words connected to what my father was trying to do today. She began to summarize the contents. She told me that, at the time of the divorce, my father had insisted on limiting public attention. The court had agreed to seal some parts of the case to protect his reputation. In exchange, he had signed conditions that recognized me clearly and gave certain guarantees about support and future inclusion in family matters. She explained that some of those commitments had long-term implications. They were not just about monthly payments when I was a child. They touched inheritance planning, status as a legal heir, and obligations to maintain certain relationships. Again, she did not push the folders toward me. She did not show me the exact phrases yet. She only laid out the structure. I asked her directly what it meant if my father was now trying to present me as barely related, as someone outside the real family. She said that, legally, reality does not change just because someone talks loudly. She said that if he was moving assets and rewriting documents in ways that ignored existing obligations, that could cause serious problems for him if challenged. She reminded me again that timing mattered. She said that I should attend the courthouse meeting. She advised me to listen more than I spoke. She told me to observe how my father and Evelyn described things, whether they pretended certain facts did not exist. She said that sometimes the strongest position comes from letting people reveal their intentions fully before you respond. When I left her office, I did not feel like a man with a weapon. I felt like a man who had finally been handed a map of a place he had been walking blind his whole life. In the days before the meeting, my father did not call me personally. Evelyn sent one more reminder in the chat, emphasizing that the purpose was to formalize decisions and prevent any misunderstandings. Andrew added a joking line about loose ends being finally tied up. I replied that I would be there. The night before the meeting, I cleaned my apartment. It was not necessary, but it helped me think. I washed dishes, folded laundry, wiped down the kitchen counter. Simple tasks, clear results. When I was done, I went to my home office corner and opened my laptop. I checked the Hale 1994 present folder again. I reviewed my notes about the gala, the country club, my mother's words, Carla's explanations, the bank conversation, the group chat messages. I did not add anything new, I just read until I felt calm. Before I went to bed, I opened my calendar app to confirm my appointments for the next day. There, in the middle of the schedule, was the entry Evelyn had created and shared with the group. Family court, mandatory attendance, 10 a.m. The time was highlighted in red. The morning of the courthouse meeting, I woke up before my alarm. For a few seconds, I did not remember why my chest felt heavy. Then I saw the calendar on my phone and the red block at 10 a.m. Family court. Mandatory attendance. I lay there looking at the ceiling of my small bedroom. Outside, the city was just starting to wake up. A bus hissed somewhere down the street. Someone slammed a car door. My life, as usual, was simple. A rented apartment, a steady job, a quiet routine. The only complicated thing in it was the family I did not really belong to. I showered, shaved, and put on my only dark suit. It was not new, but it was clean and fit me well. I tied a plain tie and checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm. Not strong, not weak, just a man who had finally decided he was done being pushed around. Before leaving, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I opened my laptop and clicked through my Hale 1994 present folder one more time. I read a few of my notes, not because I needed to, but because it grounded me. Every line reminded me that this situation was not a feeling, it was a pattern. Patterns can be described, patterns can be shown. I did not print anything. I did not bring a stack of papers. I already knew that Carla had her own folders, and my mother had hers. My job for now was to keep my head clear and my eyes open. On my way out, I paused at the thin black folder on my shelf. I had opened it a few nights before with Carla's help, after she'd given me the context. Inside were copies of some key pieces, but not everything. She still had the full sets. I ran my fingers along the edge of the folder and left it where it was. I did not need to carry it to remember it existed. The courthouse where my father worked looked different when you walked in as family. I had visited a few times as a child when he wanted to show off the building. Back then, I had looked up at the high ceilings and thought they were impressive. Today, they just felt cold. The walls were covered in plaques and framed photos of judges. My father's picture stared back at me from one of them, the same controlled smile he wore at every public event. At the security checkpoint, the guard asked for my ID. When he saw my last name, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Any relation to Judge Hale?" he asked. I said yes. He smiled like he was impressed and waved me through. I walked down the hallway toward the family court wing and thought about how names can open doors even for people who are not really welcome inside. Outside the assigned courtroom, my father's group was already gathered. Evelyn stood in a pale suit, perfect as always, talking quietly with Andrew. Andrew wore a dark suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked relaxed, as if this was just another step in a plan he had rehearsed. My father stood a little apart from them, speaking with a court clerk. He was in his robe, which made everything feel more official and more distant at the same time. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. Not warm, not hostile, just formal. Evelyn glanced at me, her eyes scanning my suit, my shoes, my face. She said that it was good I had come on time since today is very important for the family's future. She said the word family like it was a small circle that did not fully include me. Andrew stepped closer and smiled in that sharp way of his. He said he hoped I was ready to finally clear up this confusion about where everyone stood. He added that once things were properly recorded today, the future would be simpler for all of them. He did not say for all of us. I asked him what exactly they planned to clear up. His smile tightened. He said that Father would explain everything in the hearing and that it was better to keep things professional and clean. He used those words like he owned them. While we waited, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Carla. She wore a simple dark dress and carried a leather folder. She greeted my father with a calm, polite nod, then turned to me. She asked quietly if I was all right. I said yes. My voice sounded steady to my own ears. She moved us a step apart from the others and spoke low. She reminded me that today was not the place to argue feelings. She told me to let my father say what he wanted to say. She said that sometimes people in power feel safest when they are sure no one will challenge them, and that is when they show their true intent. Her eyes were sharp, but her tone was almost gentle. I asked if my mother was coming. Carla said no, that my mother's health was not strong enough for the stress, but that she had sent her support and had already signed what she needed to sign in calmer surroundings. I felt a small ache at that, but I also understood. My mother had fought her battles with my father long ago. This one was mine. A court clerk called out my father's name, then ours. People in the hallway turned their heads. I noticed a few curious faces, other families waiting for their own hearings, some court staff, and even one reporter with a notepad. In a place where my father worked, his moves attracted attention. Before we went in, Carla adjusted the folder in her hands and looked at me one more time. She told me, in a voice only I could hear, that no matter what words my father used inside that room, they could not erase ink that was already dry from years ago. She said that the law has its own memory. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than the big trial rooms my father worked in, but it still had the same structure. Judge's bench at the front, rows of seats, a table for each side. A different judge, not my father, would preside over this session. My father would be standing as a party, not as the one in charge. That fact alone gave me a strange sense of balance. Evelyn and Andrew sat at one table with my father. Carla and I sat at another. The judge had not arrived yet, so there were a few quiet minutes where people shifted in their seats and whispered. I could feel eyes on us from the small audience. A court clerk shuffled papers. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Andrew leaned over to whisper something to Evelyn. She nodded and gave my father a quick look, as if reminding him of some script they had agreed on. My father sat upright, hands folded, his face composed. If he felt any doubt, he did not show it. Carla opened her folder slightly, just enough to glance at a page. I saw lines of text, but not enough to read anything. She closed it again and placed a pen beside it. Her movements were efficient, practiced. She had done this many times with many families. For her, this was work. For me, it was my life. The door at the side opened and the judge entered. We all stood. He took his seat and looked down at the case file in front of him. He greeted my father with professional distance, as one colleague to another, then looked over at our table. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, maybe because he had seen my name in the file. Maybe because he saw the resemblance. He said a few standard words about the purpose of the session. He mentioned that this was a matter of family arrangement and future planning, and that the court was there to make sure everything followed the law. He stressed that all parties had rights and that nothing would be recorded without proper review. As he spoke, I felt my breath slow. The room, with its wooden benches and soft echoes, finally felt like neutral ground. Not my father's house, not his country club, not his gala. Here, his title was just a word on paper, not a shield. The judge asked who would speak first. My father's lawyer, a man I recognized from other events, started to rise, but my father put a hand on his arm. He told the judge that he would like to speak personally to clarify the situation with his family. The judge agreed and leaned back slightly, giving him the floor. My father stood, straightened his robe, and turned partly toward me, partly toward the judge. In that moment, for the first time in many years, I saw him not as a distant figure on a stage or in a framed photo, but as a man who knew he was about to mark his own record in front of witnesses. The courtroom door at the back closed with a soft but definite click. My father took a slow breath before he began speaking, the way he always did in court when he wanted to appear thoughtful. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture straight, his voice steady. To anyone else, he looked like a man taking control of a difficult situation. To me, he looked exactly like the man who had been preparing to erase me for years. He started by thanking the judge for making time on a busy schedule. Then he said that this matter was painful but necessary. He explained that his goal was to protect the Hale family from future confusion. He used that phrase, future confusion, 3 times within the first minute. He said that certain misunderstandings had lingered for too long. He said that he wished to make a formal declaration. He said that this step would preserve order in his household and ensure clarity in the years ahead. Then he turned to me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look proud. He looked composed, as if reading from a script he knew well. He said that while he acknowledged my existence, he did not believe I had ever truly been a part of their family. He said that I had been raised outside the home, separate from Hale traditions. He said that ties of blood alone did not create bonds. He said that he did not want the legal or public records to suggest that responsibilities or expectations should rest upon me or flow toward me. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Then he said the sentence that made the room go silent. He said, "Michael was never truly part of our family, and I am formally removing him from any future consideration as such." A woman in the back gasped. One of the clerks looked up sharply from her papers. Even the judge's expression changed slightly. My father continued talking, something about protecting Andrew, about simplifying estate planning, about avoiding potential disputes, but I barely heard the next few sentences. I only felt the cold, even clarity that settled inside me. I saw Evelyn's satisfied posture. I saw Andrew sitting tall, his chin lifted, eyes shining with expectation. They thought this was the moment they'd been waiting for. They truly believed I would stand there quietly and let them write me out of my own history. The judge asked if I wished to respond. I stood slowly. Carla placed a calm hand on my arm, steadying, reminding me to speak as myself, not as someone reacting. I nodded once. I walked toward the podium. My steps were even, my breathing steady. The wood felt cool beneath my hands when I placed them on the sides. I looked first at the judge, then at my father, then at the small audience behind us. Finally, I said in a clear voice, "If we're sharing family secrets today..." Evelyn's expression stiffened. "Then I believe it's time others heard the whole story." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single envelope. I did not raise it high or make a show of it. I simply held it in one hand, as casually as if it were a grocery list. But the moment it appeared, Evelyn went pale. Andrew frowned in confusion. My father's eyes tightened, the only sign that he recognized the size of the storm approaching. I continued calmly. "I spent years being told I was outside this family. I accepted silence, I accepted distance, but I will not accept falsehoods declared in a courtroom." I opened the envelope and removed a few sheets of paper. These were not the originals. Carla had those. These were carefully prepared copies. Carla stood quietly behind me, hands folded, ready. I turned one page toward the judge. "This," I said, "is a sealed court record from 1994. My parents' divorce settlement. My father signed it voluntarily." I read a line aloud, not revealing any sensitive private detail, only the section that mattered. "The minor child, Michael Hale, is to be recognized as the legal and rightful son of Robert Hale, with full rights of inheritance equal to any future children." Several people inhaled sharply. The judge leaned forward. My father's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. I placed the next page on the podium. "This," I said, "is a secondary agreement signed 2 years later, when additional assets were placed in a trust. It states, in my father's own handwriting, that I am to be included in all future estate considerations. My mother kept her copies. My father hoped those papers would never be needed." I turned to Evelyn, and now her face had gone completely white, drained of confidence. "And this," I added, "is a summary of fund transfers made over the past decade, from accounts originally structured for me and redirected without disclosure into accounts benefiting Andrew." Andrew's eyes snapped wide. "That's not... Dad..." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at Andrew. I kept my focus on the judge. "These documents came from 2 sources, my mother's records and financial statements obtained legally with professional oversight. My father tried to cut me out privately while using funds linked to me to elevate Andrew." My father's face was changing, slowly, like stone cracking. But I was not done. "There is also a clause," I said, flipping to the final sheet, "that triggers a mandatory review if my father attempts to remove me from family status without cause. The moment he made his declaration today, that clause was activated." The judge took the documents from the clerk who approached to gather them. He scanned the first lines. His expression hardened. Carla stepped forward then, her voice crisp and measured. "Your Honor, we request an immediate review of the trust, the transfers, and the validity of any attempt to alter family status. All of these actions appear to contradict prior agreements signed by Judge Hale himself." The room erupted in whispered murmurs. My father's lawyer shot to his feet. He stammered something about context and misinterpretation, but the judge raised a hand and told him to be seated. The judge spoke slowly. "Judge Hale, were you aware that these records were still active?" My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in my life, I saw him searching for words and not finding them. Evelyn reached for his arm, but he pulled away sharply, as if her touch burned him. Andrew looked between them, panic rising in his expression. His confidence dissolved. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Hale, Michael, thank you for bringing these to the court. These matters will require immediate investigation." He looked at my father again. "Given the severity of potential violations, the court will place all relevant accounts and inheritance instruments under temporary review." Andrew made a sound like a choked breath. Evelyn's hand trembled on her lap. My father stared at the tabletop, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his neck twitched. The judge continued, "Until this review is complete, no changes to family status, inheritance, or distribution may be made." Silence filled the room, heavy, final. I felt none of the triumph Andrew feared I would feel, only a quiet sense of balance settling into place. I looked at my father, not with hatred, not with hope, just clarity. He had spent years building an image. Today, he had destroyed it with his own words. The judge concluded the session. "All parties are dismissed until further notice." The sound of chairs pushing back echoed sharply. People whispered. A few avoided looking at my father. Others stared openly, stunned. Evelyn rose slowly, gripping the table as if her legs were unsteady. She tried to speak to my father, but he ignored her. Andrew looked like he wanted to shout, to blame someone, but no words came. His face twisted with something between fear and disbelief. Carla closed her folder and gave me a small nod of approval. Subtle, professional, but meaningful. I waited until the aisle cleared. Then I turned and walked toward the back of the courtroom. My father called my name once, quiet, strained, but I did not turn around. There was nothing more to say. Not here, not now. The courtroom door opened as I reached it. Cool air from the hallway drifted inside. I stepped out and walked down the hall, passing clerks, officers, and families who watched me with wide eyes. Some of them knew exactly what had happened. Some had only heard fragments. None of them stopped me. I kept moving until I reached the stairwell and descended to the underground parking garage. Down there, everything was dim and quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of footsteps on concrete. When I reached my car, I unlocked the door and stood for a moment, one hand on the handle. Above me, faint but unmistakable, came the echo of raised voices, my father, Evelyn, and Andrew fighting in the hallway. Their words blurred together, sharp and frantic. I didn't listen. I opened the car door, got in, and closed it behind me. The sound from upstairs vanished into silence. I rested my hands on the steering wheel. For years, they had treated me like I was nothing. Today, the law had reminded them who I had always been. I started the engine and drove out of the garage, leaving the courthouse behind as their voices faded into the concrete.